Welcome to Team DataFam Tableau User Group meeting number 21. This tug's a little bit different to a few other tugs. We meet when the presenter is available, which is when we're meeting, why we're meeting at this time today. So 7 a.m. for me, but it's a good time for Lisa to present as well. All the tugs are recorded and available on YouTube fairly soon afterwards. We've got a big set of TC25 presentations coming up over the next month or two. We've also got some visit presentations. I'll talk about that at the end. But if anyone wants to present at any time, please get in touch. My email is team.datafam@gmail.com. Today we have Lisa Trescott doing her TC25 presentation, 6-step roadmap to insightful Vizzes. For those of you who don't know, Lisa won Iron Viz in 2021. But I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. And I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And I told Chris before, but as soon as I share my presentation, oh, whoops, I can't see the screen anymore. I'm also going to put a link in the chat for you all. It's a link to resources that I mentioned in this presentation. But you can all see everything? Looks good. Perfect. Okay. Perfect. Well, hello, Team DataFam Tug. I'm excited to be here with all of you today to do a little encore / director's cut of my TC25 presentation, which is my 6-step roadmap to creating impactful Vizzes in Tableau. First and foremost, thank you. Thank you all for being here. I'm always really honored and grateful when folks choose to spend, an hour with me. So thank you so much for being here and for tuning in later on the recording. Like Chris said, I'm Lisa Trescott. I'm a research analyst at Miracosta College, which is a community college in North County, San Diego. I'm also a Tableau visionary, an ambassador. I co-lead the California Community Colleges Tableau User Group. I just very recently joined the leadership of the Tableau Public Tug back in 2021. Like Chris said, I won Iron Viz. And I also have a website, lisatrescott.com, where I share a lot of different tutorials and tips and hacks and everything for Tableau. It's also the link that I just put in the chat, and you can grab it off this QR code as well. But this is a link to all the resources that I mentioned during this presentation. So rest assured that if I ever say, I like to use this, or this is a resource that I use, it's linked in this blog post. Okay, so we're going to jump in. But before I do, just a bit of a trigger warning. I feel like this first slide might cause some anxiety and in all the analysts in the room. So you've been warned. It is a blank Tableau workbook. I don't know about you all, but for me, this can be a little overwhelming, right? It is a blank slate, and a blank slate holds infinite potential, which comes with infinite choices and infinite pressure, pressure to ask the right questions and analyze the data well. You have to make the right charts, you have to tell the right story, and you have to make it all look really beautiful with your design, right? And all of these choices can be a bit of a tall order and kind of daunting. But if you have a process in place, like a 6-step process, perhaps, to start transforming this, a terrifying blank workbook can kind of become more of an exciting blank canvas that you get to transform. So today I'm going to walk through my process for going from somewhere like here, this blank workbook, to here, my more complete final as Viz. This was my Iron Viz back in 2021. It's all about breakthrough artists based primarily on their Shazam data. And I will say up front, it is very different than anything that I would create at work. But the process that I'm going to walk you through today applies to your work dashboards. It applies to Iron Viz. It applies to Makeover Monday or anything you put out on Tableau Public. So very universal process for creating visualizations. So let's hit the road. We have 6 steps on this road trip. And the first step is getting to know your topic, which may sound very obvious because I'm basically saying in this step, you need to know what you're talking about. But yeah, you need to know what you're talking about. Right? I know that I can't be the only one who has jumped into my data and started analyzing it before I really knew much about an area or a topic. And when I've done that, those Vizzes and dashboards have been so clearly ill-informed, right? They didn't answer the right questions because I didn't know the right questions to ask, right? So the more time you invest upfront getting to know your topic, the more informed your exploration and your analysis is going to be when the time comes to jump in. So for me, this process looks like a lot of research, right? I spend a lot of time on the front end making sure that I understand the context with which my data exists, right? It doesn't exist in a vacuum. Something has happened historically. There are current trends. There are things predicted for the future. So I make sure that I'm always reading up on these things, right? Articles, blogs, industry reports. I want to know the jargon and the acronyms so I sound familiar with a topic. I also try to make sure that I understand industry standards, right? You need to know how success is measured in a certain area or industry, right? What's a normal trend? If you know that, you'll know if something is doing well or succeeding or if it's not. It's also going to help you set appropriate goals and benchmarks when you know those standards. I also talk to as many people as possible when I'm trying to brush up here, which I know as introverted analysts can be difficult, but it's something that we really need to do because I'm sure I can't be the only person here who has worked or currently works somewhere where knowledge isn't written down, right? It's oftentimes passed from person to person, right? I'm sure we've all had experiences. I've actually never worked anywhere where everything I needed to do my job was written down, right? So I've had to talk to people, and as do you, right? Especially subject matter experts, which typically, at work might just be a coworker who's been there longer than you, just somebody who has knowledge in this area or this topic or industry. Ultimately, the goal just by researching is you want to become an expert in your field or in your topic, or at the very least sound like one. Now at work, you should become an expert. Please don't go back to your boss and say, Lisa Trescott said I don't have to be an expert. Just sound like one. No, at work, definitely become an expert in your field. But are you going to spend an inordinate amount of time researching every makeover Monday you do? Probably not. In that case, you want to at least know enough to sound like you know what you're talking about and sound like an expert and kind of know what's going on. I remember back when I found out the topic for my Iron Viz was going to be the music industry. And I was like, you're kidding me. I pretty much know nothing about that industry. I am one of the least hip persons you might ever meet when it comes to knowing music and what's popular and what's trending and what the kids are listening to. Right? I remember last summer when everyone was talking about their Brat summer, and I was just like, phew, I had no idea what people were talking about. I was like, Brat dolls? Like, what is this? So the music industry is not my thing, right? But you better believe I made it my thing for a few weeks back in 2021 because I needed to look knowledgeable. I needed to be an expert. So I was reading tons of different websites and on different industry websites and state of the industry reports. I was talking to people that I knew who had experience in the music industry, right? Getting my hands on anything and everything to make sure that I understood the topic, how people talked about it, how, success was measured, so that when I did get into the data and started to explore it, I knew what to look for. I knew how to analyze the data. Right? Because ultimately what you want is you want to start presenting to an audience and sound like an expert, which brings me to the next piece. You need to know who your audience is at this point as well, right? It's really important to know who you're presenting to because that allows you to focus on their needs, right? Different audiences need different information, right? They need different levels of information. They have different data literacy needs. All right. So knowing that information and knowing who you're presenting to is really going to help you focus in on key things, right? You need to know basically what they need in their hands to, make decisions or to understand a problem, to take action, sometimes even just to care about something going on. So the more you know about your audience, the better. It's also really going to help you craft your narrative when it comes time to tell your data story. So once you know your topic, it is now time to get to know your data, right? I know as analysts, we get a new data set and you're like, oh, let's just jump in and start analyzing. And I can't wait. But you have to pump the brakes a little bit because you really need to spend time understanding what data you have before you jump in to analyze it. So first and foremost, definitely know your data sources, right? First and foremost, where is the data coming from? How is it collected? Is it, a survey? Is it biometric data? Is it hand entered? Is it a student application, right? Knowing how data is collected helps you understand if it's how reliable, right, and valid it might be. as does knowing how it's governed and who maintains these tables, right, or your sources, right? All of those things are going to help you say, oh, maybe I shouldn't use this data, or it's good and sound. You're also at work definitely going to want to know the business processes that occur around the data. So basically, who's making decisions about data and what are they doing to it at different time points. So like I said, I work at a college. I work with financial aid data, which I challenge you to find a data set that has more business processes around it, because we have all these different types, right? Grants and loans and scholarships and vouchers and waivers, and it's all given out at local and state and federal, for now, levels. It's dispersed by check, by direct deposit, by vouchers. Students apply for it, and then they accept it, and then it's awarded, and then it's dispersed. And all of these different, every single thing that I mentioned has different business processes, different people touching it, different people making decisions about it. And all of that is reflected when I actually look at the data in Tableau. Like, I can see how these processes are affecting the data. So make sure you know as much as possible. The more you know about the journey the data took to get to your desk, the more equipped you're going to be to evaluate it and understand it when the time comes. You also want to get to know the variables that you have in your data. If you can get your hands on a data element dictionary, that is going to be the gold standard. But as we established, oftentimes things aren't written down. So you might need to do some legwork here to document, right? Find out how variables are defined, because even some obvious variables can have different interpretations, right? Like I said, I work at a college. I deal with student ages all the time, right? Student demographics. But the thing about age is it changes, right? So you can start a semester one age and end at another. You could start a year at one age and end at another. So you need to know, well, what timestamp are we using for age, right? So even something that straightforward needs to be defined. You also want to make sure you know your data types, right? Strings, integers, dates, they all behave differently and store different information in Tableau. So make sure you know what type of data you're working with. And then make sure you know the expected ranges of your variables. This is going to help you spot outliers. It's going to help you spot things kind of on the extreme, and perhaps issues in your data as well if things fall outside that range. Right. I remember, again, back to Iron Viz, we had this data for Shazam, and we were told you have the top 200 songs that were Shazammed every day during this time frame. And so I'm in there, I'm analyzing the data, playing around with it, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, there are tons of songs in here that are ranked well above 200. Like, I must have messed something up in my analysis or my joins, or something's wrong, and my Iron Viz journey's over. But no, it turned out that during the time frame we had, Shazam had been acquired. And so prior to that acquisition, they had tracked above 200 songs, and then after, they had only tracked 200 and below. So if I had not been keyed into that range, I could have not noticed that at all. I could have had a very different analysis, a different story, a different outcome, right? So make sure that you are really keyed into these things. And with variables, you definitely need to know what you have, but it's also really important to know what you don't have, right? You want to make sure that if a stakeholder asks you for something, you know whether or not you can deliver it, right? I've been in a meeting or two where I've told someone they could have information that they asked for, only to get back to my desk and realize, oh no, they can't, right? That's not a good look. We want to avoid that. So really knowing your data inside and out, knowing what questions you can and can't answer is going to be important before you ever even get into the data. And then as analysts, we often work with a lot of different tables. At least I do. I can't actually remember the last time I worked on a project that only used one data table. So make sure you know how all those tables relate to each other, right? Know their primary and foreign keys, because you miss one of those in a join and everything goes out the window. Your analysis completely shot. So make sure you understand those things. And just knowing the level of detail of your data is also important, right? What does one row represent in your data set, right? Is it one order? Is it one item in an order, like the superstore, right? All of that's going to help you when you get into writing your calculations and analyzing things. So for me, a good way to get a lay of the land when it comes to your data is I would just grab like 10 to 20 rows and I walk through every single column. I usually do this in prep just because it's easy to see, but you just go through and just make sure you understand, well, you know, what does a null versus a blank mean here? What does this variable store, right? Make sure you know that and just get really thoroughly acquainted with everything that you're going to be working with, so that you can go in and go on to step 3, which is analyze your data and find a story. Now, I'm not going to teach anyone how to analyze data today. I'm sure that's probably a skill set you all possess. What I'm going to talk about is how I like to analyze data with the with data storytelling in mind, right? Knowing that I want to find a story in it. And so coming from that perspective, I start every single project of mine just by generating a giant list of questions, right? These can be fact-based questions, right? If, from a college perspective, how many students enrolled in a certain course, right? Just very straightforward. They can be about maybe how things relate to each other or trends, right? Is there a correlation between enrolling in this class and graduating on time? It could be more comparative, right? Like how are older students doing compared to younger students? Whatever it might be. At work, I would say the majority of these questions are generated by stakeholders because oftentimes they're the ones coming to us because they have a question, right? They're coming to our office because they want us to help them answer something. But even though that's the case, there is not a single project that I do at work that I don't also add my own questions to, right? Like we just established in step 2, we know the data inside and out. We know what questions can be asked and answered. Our stakeholders don't usually know that, right? So I will often be able to add clarifying questions or just add something that I think my stakeholder probably does want the answer to, or to get some more information. So always be asking those questions. And then I use those questions to help explore my data with a purpose, right? And use it to really guide my analysis. I kind of use these questions as a lens to look at the data and just follow it wherever it takes me, right? I often start off trying to answer one question and end up answering something completely different. And that is okay. That is good, right? You want to take that detour, follow the data where it goes, because that's how you tell the story of the data rather than trying to fit your own narrative onto the data, right? So make sure you're following those interesting trends and really following the data. You're also going to want to uncover outliers, right? Or you maybe don't want to, but you likely will find some outliers. And I know outliers are kind of obnoxious and annoying because you have this beautiful, nice trend and everything falls into it. And then you have this outlier over here doing something completely different. And you're like, oh, okay, like that's just like 1 or 2 data points. Can I just ignore them, right? Like they're clearly not doing what everything else is doing. No. Don't ignore them, right? When you come across surprises like that or outliers, make sure you investigate them. Dig deeper, see what's going on there, because a lot of times you're going to find the best stories in your data in those outliers. So don't ignore them. And if you don't believe me, my entire Iron Viz was 3 outliers, right? These were 3 artists who were doing what everyone else was doing. Their data looked completely different than everyone else in the data that we had. And that was not to be ignored, right? That's interesting, right? So definitely look for and find those outliers so you can tell their stories. Because like I said, this is often where you might find something very interesting going on. So I do kind of just want to demonstrate what this process looked like using this Iron Viz as an example. So I'm going to show you some of the questions that I had, which I kind of had fun putting this presentation together because I got to go back to all my old Iron Viz notes and I pulled out my questions because I'm an electronic hoarder and I have all this stuff. And I had like 30 questions, but I'm only going to show you 4 just to kind of show you where my head was and how I got to that final Viz. So we had all this Shazam and YouTube data. And one of my questions was, does curiosity on Shazam correlate with YouTube views? I was thinking maybe you're just out in the world, you hear a song and you Shazam it, and then you're so curious that you go watch the YouTube video. I was also curious about maybe what kind of trends were going on around the world. Were there different pockets for different genres? I was curious, maybe there were trend-setting cities that were catching on to new music first and kind of setting the trend for the whole world. And then I was curious about diversity in the top songs and artists, right? Is it always just the same artist? Taylor Swift is always there. How does an artist break through that? Notice that none of these questions is who are the breakthrough artists during this time period? But the question that led me to that Viz is here, and it's this one, right? Are there regions that catch on to new music first? I thought it would be cool if you could see a song catch on in one area and then kind of pulse out with popularity across the world. I was like, well, that would be amazing. And I still think it would be, but it wasn't what was in the data, right? What was in the data instead was these very few artists catching on everywhere, right? Instead of it being about a trend-setting city or area, it became about the trend-setting artists and the people. And so that's what I mean when I say you might start off with the question, but follow the data where it leads and where it shows you, because that's how you're going to uncover the stories that it holds. So once you do find that story that you want to tell in the data, it's time to decide how you're going to visually convey it through your charts. So let's start generating charts. And the name of the game here really is iterate. You want to make as many charts as you possibly can, right? Resist the urge to just use the first chart that comes to your mind, because it may or may not be the right chart for the job, right? I want to think about this in terms of buying a new car. If you went to a dealership or a lot and you drove one car and then bought it, I would think, what? Right? That's highly unlikely. You would probably test drive a lot of different cars, right? Because you want to find one that works best for you, right? That has features that you like, and you want to phase out features you don't like. And maybe you test drive a car and you didn't even know there were features available, right, that were in this car. So you have to try out a bunch. Same thing with charts, right? You want to test drive a bunch of charts so that you can find which one is going to showcase your data the best. So I'll give you an example from my Iron Viz feeder. This was the Viz that got me into Iron Viz. And for this one, I analyzed the lip syncs of RuPaul's Drag Race. And I had this one section that was comparing winning lip syncs to losing lip syncs. And I wanted to understand better how the two compared. So I test drove my first chart, which I'm sure is probably everyone's first chart when they have a comparison. It was a bar chart. Like it was okay. It didn't really tell the story that great for me, right? It's not jumping off the page. It's not obvious. So I tried to kind of fancy it up. I did a butterfly bar, which I hated because it was really hard to tell the two. It was really hard to compare the two. I did a bar and bar that was kind of getting a little bit closer. I liked where I could see kind of the discrepancies there. I tried dumbbell chart, but that was difficult when the chart point, like the data points got close together. And I tried a whole bunch of others. It's just an example. And I remember being really stuck. I remember taking this chart specifically to an Iron Viz feedback session and saying, like, I don't know what chart to use for this, and kind of showing in a few examples. But whenever I'm stuck like that, there are two main things that I do. The first is I go back and I start brainstorming more using a chart catalog. So there are a couple on Tableau public, right? Andy Kriebel has visual vocabulary. Ken Flairledge has a chart catalog. So those are great to, Tableau public resources. But this is a non-Tableau resource. It's called the DataViz catalog. I really like it because it shows you a whole bunch of different chart types, and it has this nice search by function feature that you can click on and then say, hey, I want to compare two things, or I want to look at a distribution, and it will give you examples of charts you can test drive. The other thing that I do when I am stuck is I go back and I think, what question was I even trying to answer with this chart, right? Because that's ultimately what we're trying to do. We're trying to showcase answers to questions and tell our story. And I think it's really easy to kind of lose sight of this when you're in the thick of it, right? When you're making charts and you're analyzing data, I think we can kind of forget what was the point of this, right? At least I forget all the time. So I went back and I said, okay, well, the point of this chart was to compare the winning and losing lip syncs. It's not necessarily about how many the queens did in each lip sync. It's more about the discrepancy. And so thinking about that, I ended up here with a radar chart, which was never going to be the first chart that I test drove. It's not a super common viz, but it is common in sports vizzes, right? A lot of times, radar charts will show player metrics or team metrics so you can see all of them at one time. And I like that. I like that it kind of likened drag and lip syncs to a sport, right? So I ended up here. I also like that you could easily see the discrepancy, right? You could see the space between, you could see the area of the winning versus losing lip syncs where pretty much always the winners did more things except for, one area. So that's how I ended up here to find a chart that would tell the story by iterating and generating a whole bunch of charts. The other thing you want to keep in mind when you're selecting your charts is, does it support your analysis and your story? This is more of maybe a cautionary tale about non-standard chart types, because I think we've probably all felt the lure to use more complex or kind of those eye candy charts because they look cool, right? They're eye-catching, they're fun, they're really neat. But a lot of times they can actually obscure your story rather than make it super clear to your user. So just make sure that if you are using one, it supports your story and your analysis, and it is the best chart for the job. It might be, but oftentimes simple charts done well are going to be your best chart, your best choice. And I would say at work, never use a non-traditional chart. You might not be super excited to use bar and line charts again, but it's what people understand, and your users are really going to thank you and be appreciative that you rein it in and you don't do some, exploding radial sunburst chart, right? Because this is what people come to understand your dashboards at work, right? They don't want to mine a complex chart. Not to say you can't use one in more, creative work. Just again, make sure you're using it effectively. So I'm going to give you another example from that RuPaul Viz, where I was kind of tempted to use a non-traditional chart. In this section, I wanted to show the elements performed in lip syncs and see which one had the most, right? So which lip sync was the most jam-packed. And I made this, and I was like, hoo-hoo! I made this super cool layered radial chart where you can see all the different elements for all, this bubble timeline. It looks super cool. I figured out the trig. Like, I was feeling really pleased with myself. And then I did what I always do. I go back to my question and I say, which lip sync has most elements? I don't know. So that's a problem, right? If you can't answer your own question, you have the wrong chart. And I put easily in parentheses because could I find the answer here? Yeah, probably. I could figure it out, but it's not jumping off the page. It's not obvious to me. The radials are distorting the bubble timeline, so it's really hard to compare, and know which lip sync lines up across the radials. And it's just not obvious, right? It's just not answering the question that I wanted to. So luckily I came to my senses and I made some modifications. Primarily, I ironed out that bubble timeline, right? So no longer do you have that distortion from the radial. And then I added a line chart to the type so you could very quickly see, hey, this lip sync has the most elements, right? It's very obvious. It answers the question very quickly. And then I also added some hover interactivity to kind of highlight across all the elements so you could see what was going on in that lip sync. So here, this like non-traditional radial layer chart wasn't really right, but I don't want you to leave this presentation thinking, no, Lisa's anti non-traditional, more complex charts, because I'm not. This same chart that I didn't use for RuPaul, I used for this Viz because my question was, who's the meanest girl in Mean Girls, right? And I can very quickly answer that, right? I can say, oh, it's Regina, right? The radial distortion here is not as big a deal because I'm not comparing each girl across, different time points of the movie. I just really looking at each girl independently. So the radial wasn't as big of a deal. And the ultimate question was who's the meanest? And Regina's doing the most mean things according to this bar chart at the end. So you can use them, just make sure it's supporting your data and helping tell your story rather than kind of detracting it and just being an eye candy Viz for the sake of being an eye candy Viz. Okay, so we know now how we want to display our charts. But now how do we want it to look, right? I hope you all have gas left in the tank because design is a bit of a big one. And I will say design is its own presentation, right? I know there have been DataFam Tug presentations on design. Definitely go watch them. There's no way for me to cover it all in the time we have today. So I'm going to talk to you about kind of the main elements of my design process and give you some tips and resources and pointers along the way. So if you were to go out to my Tableau public profile or even my work dashboards that I produce, at my job, none of them are 100% from my own head, right? Every single project that I have, I start by finding inspiration. So this is, browsing Tableau public, going on Pinterest, on Behance to find design styles and concepts that I like. And then once I find something that I want to emulate, I steal it. But I steal it like an artist, right? So what that means is you can draw inspiration from other people's work without directly copying it, right? You don't want to straight copy somebody's work. You want to be inspired by their work and then make it your own, right? Put your own spin on it. So for example, I have a Viz on my Tableau public profile about Breaking Bad and all the characters that are in, each of the shows. And so I started by looking for inspiration for the design, and I found these two images on Pinterest. And I really like this one on the left for the icons. I thought they were kind of fun and playful. And then I liked the image on the right for kind of this desert setting scene, right? Like, yeah, we're cooking meth in New Mexico. And so I liked both of them. I liked elements from each, and I took, kind of things from here and there and put my spin on it, and I came up with this, where you can absolutely see the influence, right? I'm definitely inspired by the color palette, kind of this gradient sky color, the desert scene, the icons, but it's not a direct copy of either person's work, right? You're taking things that you like and putting your own spin on it. So that's what I mean when I say steal something like an artist. And then once you have that inspiration for your design, you need to start planning things out, right? So you want to make sure you're mapping your route before you hit the road, because this is going to save you a lot of time. When I first started, working with Tableau, I never did this, right? I was like, I got my charts. I kind of know where they're going to go. It's fine. And those designs took me the longest. Now I wireframe, which is not something that I like to spend a lot of time doing. I keep it incredibly simple, right? I never use real data. It's all placeholders. I don't use any color. I sketch things, right? So I just draw something really quickly, but you can use tools for this too. I know Excalidraw is pretty cool. People use Figma and Miro. It doesn't matter what you do. It's just a good idea to have some kind of plan, to have some kind of wireframe. And to show you that it doesn't matter how you do it, I'm going to show you what my desk looks like, because it is littered with pieces of paper like this. These are my wireframes, right? Like I said, this is not where I like to spend a lot of my time in terms of the design process, but it's absolutely necessary. All of these became fully formed visualizations, either at work or on Tableau Public. And they did so much faster because I just had this rough plan, a very rough sketch, right? So it's really important that you take the time to lay things out. And then kind of when you know what direction you want to go, you've got your inspiration, you've got your plan, it's time to think about how you want it to look. So in terms of aesthetics, there's a lot that goes into aesthetic design. I'm going to talk about color, your text, your icons, and your images, right? And give you kind of some pointers and tips that I like to think about for each of these. So with color, with color, I think color is one of the hardest things to get right in DataViz. When we use color effectively, it is one of, if not the most powerful tool that we have as analysts to draw people's attention and focus it. But there's just so many places you can veer off course when it comes to color. I think probably the easiest way to use color ineffectively is to use too much of it, right? You take away all the power that color holds to grab people's attention when you saturate a viz in color. So my best tip is to use color sparingly, right? That's going to help you really harness the power that color holds to grab people's attention. So here's an example of a chart that uses way too much color. And this is a chart that I definitely would have made, in the beginning of my career, probably did make in the beginning of my career. I like to call it colorful spaghetti, right? We've got this line chart showing course success rates before and after COVID. Every subject is a different color. And even though I have told my user what the story is here, I've said success in math has decreased since COVID and success in English has increased. That is really hard for a user to find in this colorful spaghetti, right? They have to go over to the legend, find out which one's math, which one's English, map it to the line chart. And it's really quite difficult because there's too much color. But if we use it a little bit more sparingly and do something like this, where the courses that are part of the story are in color and everything else is grayed out, those lines become very obvious. The story pops off the page. You can easily see, oh yeah, these courses are diverging in different directions before and after COVID. So this is an example of how you can decrease the color to really make your story pop. And then when you do use color, it's important that you keep the meaning that you apply to it consistent, right? Because with this chart, we have assigned meaning to blue and orange, right? We have said to the user, orange means something is decreasing and blue means it's increasing. So you don't want to turn around in your dashboard and do something like this, where I'm like, hey, enrollment's going up, but I've used orange. So now we're out of sync, right? Now my user is having to relearn what orange means, right? So you want to keep that color meaning consistent throughout your dashboard so people aren't relearning and it's not adding to their cognitive load. The other thing with color is you want to make sure you're finding an appropriate color palette that goes with your topic and your story, right? Color can actually really set the tone. There's a whole psychology around color and how it makes us feel, how it brings, elicits, different emotions in us. So I'm always trying to harness that. I'll use kind of more vibrant colors for a fun topic, maybe more muted colors for something more serious. Because like I said, you're setting the tone and telling a story with your color before your user even reads a single word on your Viz. So if I were going to make a Viz about birthday popularity, I probably wouldn't use dark, sad colors, right? I'd probably use happy colors, right? Pinks and pastels and a pop of, a yellow with the balloon, right? These are colors that are going to elicit feelings of joy and playfulness, things that I want people to feel when they're thinking about their birthday, right? So this is just an example of how you might want to harness the power of color to kind of bring about a story or bring about feelings in your end users. And then last but not least with color, I want to talk about accessibility. There's lots of things to keep in mind in terms of accessibility and color, but the thing I want to focus on is really using colorblind friendly palettes. Colorblindness is actually a pretty common vision deficiency, the most common being red-green. So it's really difficult to distinguish between red and green when you have red-green blindness. So if you were to use the traditional stoplight palette of red, green, yellow, this is how somebody with red-green blindness would see that. If you are relying on color to communicate your story and your analyses, this user isn't going to be able to interpret it, right? So it's always best practice to avoid these colors when you can. It's also good practice to double encode things. So adding symbols and shapes and labels and size and length and pretty much any other visual cue to encode meaning in your data over and above color to make sure that everyone can access it and understand it. And I know sometimes you're kind of in a situation where you're like, okay, cool, I know I'm supposed to avoid these colors, but I actually have to use them. Maybe they're part of your brand, right? It's amazing how many colleges use red as one of their school colors. So I've had people say this to me, like, I have to use red. Okay, it's not ideal, but you can do it. There's actually kind of a nifty trick you can do in Tableau with the parameter where you put your user in the driver's seat and they can toggle between under your original palette and your colorblind palette. Again, there's a link to the tutorial in the link that I put in the chat and on my website to show you how to do this using. But so there are some workarounds that you can do to make color accessible. Okay, enough about color. Let's talk about text. Text is interesting because it is part of the aesthetic design, but it's also part of the functional design, meaning your user needs to be able to read it so that they can get meaning from your data and from your Viz. So you want to make sure that it is legible, right? Make sure it's not too small, that it's not too light. Right? This is another thing with color. You want to make sure you have a high contrast ratio so it's not just blending into the background. You don't want to get too cute with your font, right? Here I have absolutely favored design over legibility, right? That's not great. You want to make sure you're using fonts that people can read and choosing an appropriate font, right? It's important to find one that's appropriate to your topic because your font is going to send a message and tell a story beyond just what the words say, right? When you're selecting a typeface, you are crafting a narrative and influencing how people experience your Viz, right? Just like color, there's actually a whole psychology behind fonts as well. I encourage you to read some of the links that I put in that blog post, but just kind of high level, serifs tend to make us feel authoritative and trustworthy. Sans serif fonts feel modern and sleek and sophisticated. Scripts are more fun and playful and creative. So it's really good to think about this and make font and typeface an intentional choice, right? You wouldn't want to use Comic Sans for a serious topic because that's going to be out of sync, right? It's going to be disjointed and it's not going to make a lot of sense. So make sure you're finding a font that supports your story and tells the right story. You also want to establish a hierarchy with your text, right? I'm sure you've all seen images that look like this before where you're like, oh, this computer is totally reading my mind. But it is not mind reading. It is just a text hierarchy. So these are really helpful and important in design because they help guide your reader's attention, right? You can guide your user to the most important information just by making it big and bold, and makes more supplemental supportive information lighter and smaller with your fonts. Hierarchies are also helpful because they just establish some organization on your dashboards and your Vizzes, and starts to organize content into manageable chunks that people can digest more easily. Again, kind of lightening that cognitive load. So that's text. Let's now turn our attention to icons. So icons, the main thing I like to think about is keep them consistent. So there are tons of icon libraries out there that you can pull from, and they all have different styles, right? So different strokes, right? Whether it be thick or thin strokes, you could have filled or unfilled icons, and you can just kind of have different styles in general, some with color, some with borders, some with both, some with neither. Doesn't really matter which style you choose. Just keep it consistent. Don't use filled icons and unfilled, right? Pick one or the other. Because when you start to kind of use a hodgepodge of icons, things start to look disjointed, and you want to make sure there's some cohesion in your Viz. You also want to use icons sparingly. An icon simply just draws focus. So anything that's on your Viz drawing focus away from your data, you don't want to use a ton of, right? So make sure you're using icons purposefully and with intention. Right? Make sure they have a real job to do. And then you also want to use familiar icons, right? Just like your font, don't get too cute with your icon choice, right? If you get too creative picking icons, they're not going to be intuitive to people, right? People need to be able to recognize them, and you want that to the point where they don't really have to think about what the icon is for. If I see a home image, I assume that it's going to take me to a home page, right? So make sure that you're using intuitive icons for what people associate them with, and not getting too kind of crazy with your icon selection. Okay, last up with aesthetics, we're going to talk about images. I think images are really hard to use in dashboard design because they are such attention hogs, right? Images draw a lot of focus. And like I've been saying, we don't want to draw too much focus and attention away from our data. So when you use an image, you want to make sure that it's enhancing and not detracting from your data, which is way easier said than done. So I'm going to give you 3 things that I tend to keep in mind to help achieve this. So first, I keep that image pretty simple and very relevant to the topic, right? You want to have a relevant image so you can orient your user to what they're looking at, right? So again, they don't have to read anything. They just know from the image. And you keep it pretty simple, right? An image with a lot of noise draws a lot of attention. So you don't want to have too much going on. Don't want it to be too busy. I also like to add transparency to images, right? This will just help make an image a little bit more subtle, kind of mute it down, tone it down a bit, so it's not so noisy and attention grabbing. And then I also always try to match the color scheme of my Viz. So sometimes I will pull my color palette from the image that I use, and other times I have to get a little bit more creative, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So I'm going to show you how this played out with Iron Viz, because I did use an image in my Iron Viz, and it was this one. I found this on unsplash.com, which is a great resource for free stock images. It's, the sound mixing board from a sound studio, so very relevant to the topic. I knew I wanted to use it, but it did not match the color palette that I had picked out to represent my 3 artists, right? So that's a problem, right? I want it to be more cohesive. So what am I going to do? Well, in my case, I photoshopped it. So I just altered the colors of the image in Photoshop to bring it in more alignment. Now, I use Photoshop, but when I was recreating this for this presentation, I found this free LightX Studio that basically accomplished the exact same thing. So don't feel like you have to have access to Adobe Suite just to recolor something, right? So you can use this free LightX Studio. When I recolored it in there, you can see now the image looks much more in line with my color palette. It's much more cohesive. But I do kind of feel like this image has a little bit too much noise, and I don't want it to be too distracting. So that's when I add transparency, right? Transparency just helps kind of mute the image and tone it down. So when you see it in the final Viz, you can see it over here creating some visual interest, but it's not the main event, right? It's a supporting character. It's just adding that visual interest without distracting too much. It's just kind of a subtle background. Okay, that's aesthetics. Let's now talk about how it functions, because function is absolutely part of the design process. Here, I'm thinking more about user interface and user experience, or UI UX. This is basically all that interactivity you put in. How are people navigating through your Viz and your dashboard? Are they clicking buttons? Are they hovering over something? Are they using actions or filters or drop downs? All of those things are going to be part of the UI and UX and play into the functionality of your Viz. And again, I want to show you an example from that RuPaul Viz, where I had a section that looked at all of the queens and all of the things that they did in each of their lip syncs. And the way I originally designed it was like this, where it was just like this big box and the user had to scroll through it. Is it functional? Yes. Could it be better and more engaging? Also yes, right? And luckily I went to an Iron Viz feedback session that Sarah Bartlett organizes every year. And Chantilly Juggernaut was there, and she looked at this and she said, why don't you make this a carousel? And if she tells you to make something a carousel, you make it a carousel. And she was right, right? Like, this is so much better. Now I've got these kind of pages at the bottom and these buttons where you can go back and forth. It's much more engaging. It's much more interactive just by making a couple of tweaks. This is how you might increase or enhance the functionality. This is actually something that I've gotten really into lately. I have a whole dashboard and companion blog post about how you can achieve things like that carousel and other enhanced functionality aspects in Tableau. Again, we don't have time in this presentation to go through it, but I encourage you to check out that blog and that workbook to get ideas for how you can enhance that functionality. And then lastly, with design, let's talk about clutter. Clutter is the nemesis of data visualization because, as I've been talking about, every time you put something on a Viz or a chart, you are drawing focus away from your data. So you need to make sure that everything you put on that Viz or that chart has a purpose. A really good rule of thumb is to ask yourself, if I take this away, can my user still understand it? And if the answer is yes, get rid of it, right? You don't need it. So things like grid lines, really long text labels, redundant axes, all of those things are just clutter. It's also really helpful to add white space. This is basically padding or margins and gutters just to allow your data to breathe. It gives people, again, kind of room to process things when there's space around the data. Because the ultimate goal here with decluttering is you want to reduce that cognitive load. I've talked about this a couple of times, but the goal is to make people not have to think too hard, right? Don't give them things to mine through that aren't important so that they can really focus on the data. And with all of these design components and choices that you're making, there's one kind of overarching thing that I'm always keeping in mind. And I've alluded to it a couple of times, but I want to just say it outright, which is your design should always support your analysis and your story, right? Every color, every font choice, every icon, every image, everything that you decide to do design-wise should be in support of your story. It should really enhance the analysis and tell the story of your data and not be distracting. And with that, we have come to the sixth and final step. I'm sure this is everyone's favorite step. It's time to get feedback and do quality assurance. So I put this at the end, but definitely get feedback throughout this process. I'm always sending pictures of charts to my coworkers like, hey, do you like this chart better or this chart? Right? Get feedback throughout the process, but always build in time at the end as well to do kind of a final check. When it comes to feedback, I usually try to get it from multiple groups of people. I always send things to other analysts, other people in the DataFam, because they are steeped in data and analytics and Tableau. They have a great perspective. They know what Tableau is capable of doing. But lay people are probably going to be the consumers of your dashboards at work, right? They're not likely analysts. So sending it to somebody who's not super analytically minded, who doesn't know Tableau as well as we do, is also going to be really helpful because they're going to give you feedback from an actual user's perspective. And then when I first started kind of using Tableau and asking for feedback, I had this idea of, oh, I asked somebody for feedback, I have to take it. This is your Viz. This is going to be a reflection of you and your work. If someone gives you a piece of feedback that you don't really agree with, don't feel like you have to take it just because you asked. Now, if multiple people give you the same piece of feedback, you don't want to ignore that, right? You don't want to ignore all the warning signs and just drive off a cliff. Make sure that you, if that's the case, you kind of open your mind up a little bit and start incorporating, be willing to incorporate their advice. And then, of course, you just want to make sure everything works, right? Do some quality assurance. Have someone check your analysis, your calculations, right? Just does everything work? Are your filters filtering? Are your parametering, right? Your actions working? Do navigation buttons go where they're supposed to go? Are there any typos or grammar issues? What you want to avoid is publishing a dashboard, especially at work, where there's a typo or a navigation button goes to the wrong page, and your user sees that, and immediately they're going to start to distrust the data. Even if your analysis is sound, if they find an issue or an error somewhere, they're probably going to start to distrust the data, which is the last thing that we want. So make sure everything is running as it is intended. And with that, you have my 6 steps, and you can drive off into the, what is this? You like that acting, right? This is a roadblock to my unofficial 7th step, which is publishing. I say this is unofficial because it's kind of implied, right? You did all of this work. Of course, you're going to publish it, right? At work, yes, it's your job. You're going to publish it. But I find a lot of times when we're doing something more creative, right, putting something on Tableau Public or doing a Makeover Monday, there can be a big roadblock here. At least for me, there tends to be. And for me, that roadblock is perfection, right? Making sure every little nuanced detail is perfect in my brain, even though it's never going to be perfect, right? There's no such thing as a perfect Viz. So don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, right? I know this is something that I struggle with. I like to call myself a recovering perfectionist. And it's hard. It's hard to kind of get through this. But the key for me has been to kind of shift to a more processed focused mindset, right? Instead of thinking, oh, I need to put out this flawlessly designed Viz or this final product, I now try to focus more on what did I learn? What did I to experiment with a new feature in Tableau? Did I make progress? Did I add to my skill set, right? Thinking about it in those terms can really help you kind of get over that roadblock and push through it. Because I'm here to tell you, no one expects you to be perfect. So don't stop expecting that from yourself, right? And once you do that, once you start to publish your work more, you're going to see yourself get better and better. You're going to see yourself start to grow and really become an even better analyst and even better at data visualization. So with that, we can break through the roadblock and start to drive off into the sunset and start to create really beautiful and impactful Vizzes using this roadmap as your guide. And with that, I'll stop sharing and just say thank you all because I can't see anybody's faces or the chat. There we go. Now we're back.
The chat's been ticking along as it usually does. It's pretty good.
Yes, I couldn't see the chat at all. So
any questions? I think everyone is a presenter. You can unmute or type in the chat. There was nothing in the Q&A. There was a few comments about different things along the way. Silence.
Silence.
Okay. And we'll have time for questions after anyway. So here's all Lisa's contact details. She did mention some of those things along the way. So she's put in the chat the link to her actual blog post, but that's her website, Tableau Public, LinkedIn, X, Blue Sky, in a lot of different places. That's always good. There was a Q&A. There's a Q&A right now. Oh, Jeremy just says, brilliant, should be required listing. Yes, definitely.
Thank you. I like Pete saying 80% done is 100% awesome. Yes. That's very true.
Yeah, the recovering perfectionist is always, this is like, does everything work or not? Or then you change something over here and it breaks something over here and you've got to actually keep track of that as well. I did that with a client dashboard recently. I'm focusing on this dashboard. They went, yeah, but this other one's broken. I didn't realize that the changes I was making broke the other one that I didn't look at. I'm like, there
can be some trickle down effects that you don't intend.
Awesome. A lot of people chatting. No one's talking. We've got time for that in a few minutes. That's okay. So the last section for this tug is always fast five. So quick questions, quick answers. Lisa got the trick before. It's a riff on Fast and the Furious, but it's just 5 quick questions. I need to preface these questions, and they say they're just random. There's no targeted questions at all, obviously. Lol, you'll get the joke in a minute. And there's no wrong answers. It's all just what your feelings are about each thing. But totally random, not targeted at you at all, right?
Okay.
So the first question is from Sam Batchelor saying, do you wish you had the chance to be on the Iron Viz stage, or were you quite happy your year was virtual?
That's tough. I don't know. At the time, I didn't feel ready for Iron Viz because I was very new to the community and I didn't have much confidence. Yeah, I actually thought it was kind of a joke when I found out that I was in it. So at the time, I think virtual was really good for me. Now I would probably say, yeah, I could do the stage and be less affected by it. But I think at the time, virtual was probably played to my strengths.
It's that added level of pressure as well. But does that help or does that hinder? Hopefully it helps.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of sad that I didn't get to experience it that way, but it played out how it played out.
At least we had 9 Viz that year.
Yeah, at least there was one that happened.
Yeah. Awesome. Next question is, what's one design discovery you've made that really stuck with you, and why does it matter to you? That's from Fee at Data.
Ooh, honestly, it's probably color, because like I mentioned in the presentation, color is just so difficult. So realizing you don't need a lot of it is probably the best design advice I ever got, because I showed you that colorful spaghetti. That's definitely the stuff I used to make in the beginning of my job, which doesn't doing anyone any favors. So I would say, yeah, using color effectively, not using gray a lot is probably my favorite design thing.
And these questions are completely random and you haven't seen them before. I know that.
No, I haven't.
But it's funny you answer that question, because I think the next question is, what's your favorite color to use in charts? And I didn't even plan that.
It's gray. I like gray because everything pops against gray. I think I even said it in my presentation that you can it's a great supporting character. I use, like when I'm visiting for like my work dashboard, I use 2, maybe 3 colors plus gray. So I feel like gray is always there. It's a staple. So yeah, it's probably my favorite.
Definitely. Thank you. And what makes you happier, finishing a chart or having people use it?
Having people use it. Having people use it. I've made so many things at work where, you can track to see who's using it. And you're like, oh, I spent a lot of time. No one has used this dashboard. Yeah. And then we've got, I have my favorite people at work. There are my power users who actually use the data and the charts I make and, impact students and make changes for them. So that's always the best feeling.
Awesome. And the final question is, which one is better, charts that change the world or charts make daily life easier?
Ooh. That's tough being in the world we live in right now. I say that because I don't know if there is a chart that could change the world at this point. But I guess I would say charts that change the world, if one so exists.
Awesome. That's fine. Thank you. Thank you for that. Our next tug is in 2 days' time from now. So Heather Cox doing her replay from Visit Sydney about out-of-the-box unlocking creativity in Tableau. And she talks a lot about her Tableau public profile, the Vizzes, and I'm saying that right. I can't remember how to say it, but anyway. But the located dashboard that she built for some medication tracking, whole heap of other things. You can see the times on the screen right now. So it's in your time zone or close to that time zone. You can register through the QR code or just on the user group's website as well. So this recording and a lot of different tug recordings are available on YouTube at Team DataFam. There's a Spotify podcast, there's an Apple podcast, so you can listen but not watch. Obviously, this is one of these sessions where you've got to watch it a lot. but what I tend to do is listen in the car and then catch up on it on YouTube later on. And if anyone else wants to present, please email me at team.datafam@gmail.com. So again, thank you, Lisa, for that presentation. Awesome. Was good to have that director's cut of probably more content in there. The acting at the end was pretty awesome as well. It's just like, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's your slide deck, so that's cool. And again, thank you for your time, and I'll open it up for questions and everyone else to talk as well. And then no one talks.
No one talks.
It's either too late or it's too early. It's okay.
Yeah, Anne just mentioned that Heather got Viz of the Day today. So it's perfect timing. Yeah, she did. She's on a roll.
They're starting to smash it out. I've been tracking Viz of the Days and viewing and stuff. So I've got the data. I just need to actually build the dashboard on top of it.
How are you tracking them? Like, just who's getting them, or?
I just scrape it every day to say who's got Viz of the Day and what's the viewing numbers as well.
Oh, okay.
So it's pretty good. It says Ayad saying it's 1 a.m. where he is. So
that's commitment. That's
I think he's done that before. Early in the morning, it's just like, yeah, it's awesome that people dial in. I don't expect people to join meetings at 1 a.m. in the morning, but it's a pretty good effort if you do.
I definitely don't.
Yeah.
I'm never awake at 1 a.m. I have a toddler, so
yeah.
I'm in bed at like 9:30.
Get sleep when you can.
Yeah.
I think that's it. If everyone is quiet, everyone is a presenter. You can unmute yourself. You can type in the chat if it's 1 a.m. and you don't want to disturb the rest of the house. Okay, we'll wrap it up there. Again, thanks, Lisa, for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great to catch up. Great to see the session.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Talk to you soon, guys.
Bye.
Okay, bye.